Belated Mother's Day to folks around the boot, certainly, and around the country and around the world. This is Louisiana versus All Y'all's Recruit That Boot. I'm Jarrett Roser. He's Sam Spiegelman, and it is not the best week of LSU news to talk about, but we're going to dive into a couple of prospects that we at one point thought were going to be heading to Baton Rouge and are heading a little bit farther west to Austin and Dallas, it appears, as well as maybe an under-the-radar in-state guy worth watching for LSU fans. Maybe he does end up coming to Baton Rouge for the next level in this 2026 class, but we'll get into all of that. And, I mean, for folks that have watched this before, probably a random allotment of tangents as well along the way. Sam, what's going on, man? How are we doing this Tuesday morning?
I'm doing great. I'm rocking my St. Aug purple this morning, so it's a good day. It's an ode to our good friend Bobby Valdez over there. Listen, I can't complain. This is my big. I started my spring football tour last week, so I was able to hit a couple of schools. This week, I was making a trip into Georgia to hit some high schools in that area. A couple of spring games this week, which always gets me excited to see some of these top guys in action. Spring games, the feel of a spring game, as because I know that you're going to be busy this week as well. Coaches are on a different level. It's like they are open books. They are jubilant. They want to see you. That's not that me. It's not always the case when they see me, but it's just, I love the spring. It's always a good time. I'm happy I'm finally out, and I didn't get to do Louisiana this year for spring practices. I think that'll change next year, so we can plan some live podcasts for next year. But I'm stoked. I'm having a great week. I can't complain. Go Knicks.
Yeah, great week for those guys for sure. Yeah, man. I mean, we're going to talk about two things during the course of this with some spring football, I guess, and also at the end, we'll hit a brief bit on track, where I was at the track state championships Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Two things that I think as a young writer years ago that were not my favorite. I didn't enjoy hitting the road in May for some of those things as much as I do now. And over time, exactly what you said, the spring football dynamic is so much more of a laid back opportunity to visit with coaches and a lot of kids, and I mean, interview some guys for the first time that are going to go on and be prospects in 2 or 3 years. And so some of that stuff is really cool. I've had a chance to get to 10 schools so far the last 2 weeks and change. We'll get up to a couple more today and then go into real spring game after spring game mode for the next week. And so here's where we get to make you jealous a little bit, as I get to go start my spring game tour with that Carr and Destrehan matchup on Wednesday night that we've had a chance to catch the last couple of years. But same sort of thing with track, which we'll get to at the back end. It's just good to see both the football guys out there, and we'll talk about one of them in kind of our last topic of the day, as well as just, I mean, a whole lot of kids competing at the highest level. And I talked to a lot of kids that are going to go be SEC track athletes next year, both on the boys and girls side. And so cool to kind of get a chance to dive into another sport and see some great, Louisiana kids that are doing some big things. That's all exciting. That's all well and good. We mentioned two guys that are, at present not going to LSU, Hayward Howard and Jakai Anderson. Hayward is someone that we thought, even with the late push from LSU, that he would end up in purple and gold at the next level. Jakai was a guy who'd obviously been committed since last summer and has now flipped his commitment to SMU yesterday. Man, time flies, huh? Was that yesterday or in the last couple of days?
Saturday morning.
Okay. Let's start with Hayward, and we'll kind of dive into each dynamic one by one. Hayward Howard, Texas commitment on Friday afternoon at 2:00. I remember that time well. How surprised were you? Maybe not by the time 2:00 came around, because I think we kind of knew the deal by then. But when you started hearing this middle of last week, Wednesday, Thursday, that this was everything, how surprised were you by the route for Hayward Howard?
I wasn't surprised by 2 p.m. at all, because that's the time that kids are getting out of school over there at Edna Carr, and I figured that was the perfect time to get that commitment made public. But no, to your point, I had heard that Hayward was going to commit, and when I heard that, I was not surprised one bit. This is a family that has been exploring their options and doing their homework as each offer has come in. They've been very quick to go visit the schools, and that applied to LSU. They were there last month when they picked up the offer from Frank Wilson and Corey Raymond, and obviously that was a needle-moving visit, and enough for a lot of us to think that Hayward was going to end up in Baton Rouge. And then about a week later, Texas came in and followed suit with an offer. He made his way to Austin for Longhorn City Limits, which one of the biggest events Texas had this spring. And I'm not completely surprised that Texas made the immediate move. They have a fantastic coaching staff. They are the defending SEC champions. They recruit the heck out of the state of Louisiana. I'm surprised that Terry Joseph, who had put the offer on the table and now is with the Saints, is not on the staff as the architect behind this. But what Texas offers with Coach Orphy, I've never met him, but I have heard so many great things about Mark Orphy, Texas's new quarterbacks coach, who comes from Rutgers but has ties to Texas, obviously is familiar with the talent across the South and in these SEC states. And Steve Sarkisian has done a fantastic job recruiting not just Louisiana kids and Texas kids, but he's a fantastic head coach recruiter, real cool, laid back, California cool. And Hayward, I know Hayward, we know his parents. That's going to resonate with those kind of people that love a confident, cool coach like Steve Sarkisian, and the opportunity to join this Texas class, which is going to be in the top 5, top 10 when it's all said and done. LSU, of course, with any in-state kid, is going to want to see him work out and see him further. I would bet everything in my wallet that whether it's Frank or Corey or Cortez, or if not all three of them, will be at Destrehan later this week, getting an eye on Hayward Howard.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if Coach Orphy was also there, and potentially like Alan Clark. With that being said, he wanted to have this decision made, and that's basically been a theme for Carr kids. They love to get this commitment out of the way so they can focus on their own season. Obviously, Carr is just coming off a state championship, and their goal right now is to end this year with another one before those kids sign on the dotted line. And while I'm not saying Hayward Howard's decision is finalized by any means, I'm not surprised that Texas was able to make a big splash and land an early commitment. But I'd also say we're plenty of time away from the early signing period.
Yeah, the timeline dynamic was interesting to me just because he had planned on his July 23rd birthday announcement. And look, there are two guys in the state that I remember recently in terms of LSU targets that talked about some birthday commitment plans. Darius McKinley, a week and a half ago, I guess, told me his November 8th birthday, he wants to wait and commit. And so November was interesting, and I wondered how likely the college coaches would be to wait for that versus try and push him to, whether it be silently commit behind the scenes before the school year starts or whatever. The college coaches want to figure out a lot before the fall these days as well, and get most of that class kind of figured out by at least the early stages of the season and know what they're working with down the home stretch. Hayward's plans were to commit still before the season for his birthday in the summer. And so as much as he was kind of gearing toward that, for all of a sudden, whatever it was, Wednesday, I think it to get moved up to, in 48 hours, this thing's happening, was really interesting. And it makes this summer interesting too, to see whether there's a strong enough push from LSU after getting a chance to see him at the spring game, or if they can get him to camp in June as they would have liked. And, there's going to be a lot of kind of back and forth in that regard in terms of just what the pitch from LSU coaches sounds like and how receptive to it the Howards are to potentially continue to listen. And, what the details of that are, and am I coming to camp in June and all of those things. But I was surprised that the timeline jumped up 2 months. And then when it did, it did certainly seem like Texas was making that move and making that move to get him before LSU could get him on campus again in June.
Yeah, the fact that Texas has one out for Hayward Howard is not surprising. I think the timing is the only surprising part of it. Again, these are offers that he has received in the past, month and change. And obviously, like I said, he's been to both campuses. But it's a pretty quick decision made off of his homework. Pressure makes diamonds, and that's what Ed Nakar kind of forces these college coaches to do. Like, how much do you really like him? Will you take his commitment right now? And Texas said absolutely, hell yeah, and I don't blame them. I think we would have expected Frank Wilson and Corey Raymond to do the same. LSU is going to go through their own process, and if they still want him and Howard still has interest, which we do think he does, it just opens the door for a really busy summer as well, and obviously the months after. But pressure makes diamonds, and now the pressure is on this LSU staff. Hayward Howard's decision is made. Texas has a 4-star cornerback from New Orleans, and they look really good right now. But the reason we're talking about what's going to happen this summer or what's going to happen this fall is because there was obvious mutual interest between LSU and Howard. Being an in-state kid and being an early commitment, now the pressure is on LSU to really impress this family, roll out the red carpet over the ensuing couple of months, and we'll see if they're willing to do that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because he is a guy that for a long time I thought was likely to end up in this LSU class way before the offer and all those things. He just looked like he had the makings of the top corner in Louisiana, or a case for that sort of thing. And so I had talked to him over the winter of a level of, as someone that has known him for a few years, of frustration that it seemed like LSU might let him leave the state when it seemed like he would want to stay in the state. And then obviously his recruitment continued to develop, and LSU did make its move, but he had, some great opportunities elsewhere. And so watching now how he navigates this next phase of his recruiting process will be really interesting. And I know for some, kids, parents, coaches at the high school level around the state, they look and say, this is a kid that was getting an awful lot of offers last summer, but had to wait until April of his junior year to get the LSU offer. And you hear that frustration sometimes from folks around the state of LSU maybe taking its time too much and doing too much due diligence and whatnot. And I kind of explained the dynamic of most Louisiana guys do want to go to LSU. And so if you make that move too quickly, you risk burning a bridge if you see a kid not develop the way you anticipated, or the numbers fall differently than anticipated, or whatever the case may be. But it certainly builds some chips on some shoulders at times too when LSU kind of delays some things. What are your thoughts on the way they approach some of that in terms of the timeline and the selectivity with in-state guys and when the offer goes? Part of it is just the nature of a big program within state guys, but I know LSU is probably one of the slower, more selective programs with the way that they approach some of those things. How do you feel about the way that they go about it versus some of their peers, and kind of the way that it feeds some of those dynamics with the high school recruits?
Yeah, LSU, in my opinion, actually used to be a little bit stricter and more stingy about how and when they offered in-state kids. This is Hayward's offer came around the time that guys like Jamar Chase got their offers from LSU. It was that spring after their junior seasons, and often it's behind some of these other SEC schools that come in, and then it's a lot of pressure for LSU to say it's either now or never. In Georgia, they're a little bit more liberal with when they put these offers on the table. They love to have their in-state kids camp, and they might be more willing to offer before their junior seasons, during, or immediately after. But they still have to camp. Those are not committable offers. They might offer a good chunk of the kids in state. So you can look at it from both sides of the fence. LSU is being slow about offering because they want to be able to accept my commitment whenever I make it. Or you can say, oh, LSU offered me before my junior season at Berwick, but now they're not willing to accept my commitment because they're waiting to see how these 3 edge guys make up their mind, which is a little bit more of a predicament when you're an in-state kid and you had that offer. So I think there's pluses and minuses to both. Personally, I think that this LSU staff, again, Jabari Mack picked up a late offer from LSU, and now he's committed. it's worked in their favor quite a few times, and it's bit them on the butt a few times in the past. I think, kind of when we broke down Hayward Howard's, offer to begin with, it's each recruitment is different. And I know that sounds, a little bit cliche or whatever, but, everyone is on their own timeline, whether it's a development timeline or a recruiting timeline. And it's on the coaches, it's on the coaching staff. It's about the people that are recruiting them to kind of determine, hey, this is the right time to make an offer if we're going to be successful in this recruitment, knowing the characters involved and what's at stake. And personally, I don't have an issue with the way LSU does it. I think that they're careful about it, because I think it hurts more to say, no, you can't commit, than where's my offer and explaining why we took our time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a balance there, and that's part of the conversation that I have when you hear every year several guys or several families that are getting kind of frustrated with the timeline. And at one point, Hayward was a guy that was getting frustrated with the waiting game and so many other offers coming in, and that offer from LSU taking until April. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter when an offer comes if it's the right place. I mean, figure out what the place is for you and if they'll take you, and if they'll take you on signing day, that's ultimately all that matters. If there's a good relationship and whatnot in place, doesn't matter if that offer came October of senior season or 2 years earlier. It's kind of what matters down the stretch. I will say though, a couple of the examples you gave, I mean, Jabari got his offer a year and months prior to making the commitment. So he was, I mean, on the heels of his junior season last January, and
Sure.
And Jamar had to wait a little bit, but Jimmy wasn't too pleased about it at times during that waiting process either, wondering what Les and company were dragging their feet about.
Yeah, it was the camp situation. It was the offer late from Ed Orgeron's staff, but again, he still had to camp.
Yeah, no doubt. And obviously, whether that offer came here, there, when or whatnot, or what those conversations looked like of Les thinking he wanted to move Jamar to DB at one point. End of the day, Jamar ended up in Baton Rouge, had a great college career, and now is obviously off to a great start to his NFL career, and on the heels of that Triple Crown season, all those things. But let's get into Jakai a little bit. And I mean, there's interesting recruiting aspects to his whole deal as well. He was a member of this great receiving class that LSU has been putting together that we've talked about so many times, along with Kenny Darby, Jabari Mack, who we just talked about, and Tristan Keys, obviously from just up the road in Hattiesburg. And Jakai ends up flipping to SMU, and I think a lot of fans were surprised to see an LSU to SMU flip. But I think we've talked about at this point, sometimes the numbers game in certain position groups in one class, and particularly in the NIL and heading toward potential rev share era, it's tough to stockpile huge numbers at one position when you only have so much to go around. And so sadly, it looks like Jakai, who I think is better than a typical fourth receiver in a recruiting class, ends up having to go try and find a home elsewhere and land with SMU, where he can potentially be the guy in this recruiting class for them, or one of the top couple. Talk me through how things unfolded for Jakai to end up, instead of in Baton Rouge, heading out, honestly past your way a little bit up there toward Dallas.
Yeah. I know that Jakai was able to make his first visit to SMU, I think in March, and then again in April. And that was, I think, besides Tulane, the only other campus he's been to besides LSU so far. So, one, you have to look at it from the perspective of, even though he's an uber talented kid, a kid from New Orleans is finally getting to explore some places outside of Louisiana, and it really kind of catching his eye. Rob Likens, their wide receiver coach, is a fantastic wide receiver coach, comes from Miami, where he was with Rhett Lashley. And SMU, by the way, won a playoff game last year, and has really taken to recruiting at different levels. They have a fantastic NIL collective over it on the Hilltop. They have great coaches. Again, the playoff victory last year. And while LSU is stockpiling this blue chip wide receiver talent, we talked about Jabari Mack finding his spot in the class, beating out a ton of SEC foes for Tristan Keys, the number one wide receiver in the class, and LSU surging with another five-star receiver in Boobie Feaster. All of a sudden, Jakai is obviously, I don't think that he was necessarily like hurt or worried by any means, but SMU was able to take advantage of the tea leaves and say, hey, why are you sitting in this class when they're over recruiting you potentially, and when you can come, like you said, be a highlight of our 2026 class. And after a couple of visits, listen, Cortez Hankton was in New Orleans visiting with Anderson and his parents and his coaches, trying to keep him in the class. And I think there was still pause, because I think Jakai grew up rooting for LSU and wanted to be a part of this class. And the way it just shaped out, I think that he found more opportunities available to him in Dallas. That's just a credit to this SMU staff that saw it was unfolding in LSU. Now, this only hurts if LSU swings and misses on a guy like Boobie Feaster now, or Jace Matthews as a really high blue chip target. It always stings when you lose an in-state commitment, and it really stings when it's an in-state kid that has camped for you the last 2 summers and has been one of the top campers in Baton Rouge each year. So listen, the sting factor is still to be determined, because we don't know how this wide receiver corps is going to end up shaking out by December. But right now you got Kenny Darby and Tristan Keys and Jabari Mack. It's going to be really hard to find a 4 or 5 star receiver that's going to be superior than Jakai, how he looks in the class. But Cortez Hankton's a hell of a coach, and they have their top targets on the board, guys like Jalen Lott and Boobie Feaster and Jace Matthews. And assuming that they get one of those, it delineates the sting factor. But otherwise, it's pretty huge, because SMU doesn't normally go into New Orleans and flip a kid that's committed to an SEC school. And in this particular cycle, they might do that a couple of different times, flipping some SEC commits.
I'm super interested to see what this means now for LSU's recruiting class at the wide receiver position moving forward. I think it's important for fans to recognize that as good as Jakai is, and I think for a tangent there, a lot of times when guys flip or don't commit to your program, there's a tendency from fans to immediately say, oh, well, maybe that guy's not that good. And in some cases, programs do move on from prospects depending on how development happens. The 2 guys we're talking about today are fantastic players that I know both of us are extremely high on in this 2026 class. And I think they both, if they end up at Texas for Hayward and SMU for Jakai to start their college career and, sign in December and all those things, I think those are 2 phenomenal fits for those guys that they can go have a ton of success. All that said, if you look at a receiver class in 2026 for LSU and try to look at it in a vacuum and not think about, okay, well, we didn't get Jakai, and look at, we do get Tristan, Jabari, and Kenny Darby, that is one hell of a trio of wide receivers to be really excited about. And then we'll obviously see what happens moving forward as the Tigers do still try to potentially have a 4-guy class at that position group, and what that looks like. And I mean, to your point, a lot of how we'll judge ultimately the sting factor in retrospect of Jakai heading elsewhere will fall on what they are able to do with that additional spot in this class. Do you feel like this is a sign that they feel well positioned with Jace or Boobie or any of those guys, or that this is more of a sign of, man, it might be tough to get 4 guys of that caliber all in the same class? Because you can kind of read the dynamic each way, through different colored glasses.
Yeah, I think LSU is in striking distance with each of those guys that I mentioned, with Boobie Feaster being at the top. They really like Jace Matthews, and I think there's a mutual interest with Jace and LSU, being from not too far away, close to Mobile, almost a local sort of, I think, Greene County. And then Jalen Lott, who is a guy they like in Frisco, who they've visited quite a few times. I think they might like him on either side of the ball, but also he has a knack for playing receiver, and that's one of the things that might help him ultimately, or help LSU rather. But to me, I wouldn't say that they technically lead for any of those guys. So if I was drawing this up for an LSU fan, I think they'd rather have Jakai committed and play with the 4-star in the loop. I mean, I know that Coach Hankton did not want him to get out of this class, and they worked very hard to try to keep him from flipping. Obviously, I think personally for Feaster, I think A&M has come on really strong, and with an in-state team that has a big NIL package and a big need for wide receivers in this particular class. I think it's going to be really hard to keep up with A&M, but I do think LSU is close. And I'd also keep an eye out for Alabama, just, adding to the competition. For Jace, I think Texas A&M again and Auburn are as well as obviously Ole Miss and Mississippi State, which do not like to let blue chippers leave their state. And Jalen Lott is, of course, super talented, has been to Baton Rouge, will OV at the end of the month, but as a Texas legacy, he's visiting Georgia this weekend. And by the way, Oregon loves guys with this kind of speed, and he's going to visit Oregon last before making his decision. So I'd rather have Jakai committed. We're talking about a guy that we're both high on. Jakai has had an excellent spring from what I've understood from coaches that have been around MAC 35. I heard he's up to 175 pounds. To me, he's a really gifted route runner. What I've always loved is his ability to separate. I think is second to none. I think he's a better separator than all of the other in-state commitments in this class at the position. And I think I've said this to you, but maybe not. He is kind of the guy at MAC 35. He's doing, he's taking screens, he's going deep, he's played defense in the past. He's a incredible kickoff return and punt return specialist. I think if you surrounded him with more talent, and this is no shot at Coach Daggs, we know that they have an enrollment issue, but if he was around more talent, I think he could be an even more impactful piece. Not to say that he isn't the guy at 35 now, but he could be a really high level part of an offense and part of a special teams unit. So to me, it's a big sting factor already, especially given where they stand with those other guys with a lot of time to go, of course.
And wrapping up, finishing, transitioning from a couple of guys that have been heavily on the radar throughout their high school careers, or certainly for the last year or so, to an under the radar guy that may be worth LSU fans starting to pay a little bit of attention to. Someone who I'm surprised has remained as under the radar quite this long, considering he's been in the Superdome to end his past two seasons as a sophomore and as a junior. But Isaiah Washington, the star quarterback from Haynesville, up there, the 1A program that's competed for Division IV state championships the past couple of years. And despite coming up just shy in both of those games, they had their hands full against Oak Grove a couple of years ago, and just shy against South Platte this year. Isaiah was one of the highlights of those teams to get to that point and to make some plays, on that dome turf. He's someone that has seen his recruitment start to pick up some, with Houston and Louisiana Tech coming in recently with his first two offers. And I was excited to see him at track, where he had some of the top hurdles and triple jump marks at any classification level throughout the weekend. Won a couple state championships, was on the podium a few different times between his 3 individual events and a relay race. And so he's someone that has continued to have a strong spring and kind of position himself well. I think he's up around 6, maybe pushing 6'1", 175 or so now as well. And he was telling me at track that he and his coaches have started to hear more and more from other programs around the region, including some of the SECs, including LSU, who sounds like they may be making a trip up north this week and going to add Haynesville to that trip and go check him out some now that he's back in spring ball. And so he's someone that I like an awful lot as a DB. I know, some of the programs are looking at him as a potential wide receiver, and we saw the ball skills on that interception against South Platte this year. But you're someone that has seen him at least those 2 games the last couple of years. Just hearing some more about Isaiah getting a little bit of love here late in his recruiting process. Thoughts on what you saw from him the times we were able to see him in person?
Yeah, 100% has been one of those guys that is, they play on either the first or second day of state championships. So he's one of the early names that we've both jotted down as, hey, early standouts. This is the guy at Haynesville. And in the past, when you are the guy at Haynesville, it's usually translated pretty well to your recruiting process. To me, I'm with you 150%. This has got LSU DB offer written all over it. The multiplicity that he plays 100 different roles for Haynesville. We talk about what Jakai Anderson brought to the table, being the guy at MAC 35. Well, If you look at the makeup of an ideal Corey or Raymond corner or safety, it's going to be position versatility, experience on offense, ball skills on defense, and also these incredible track marks that he's put together over the weekend. As you mentioned, the 110 hurdles, the 300-meter hurdles, the triple jump is out of control at nearly 46 feet. Give me a break. He's long and lean. Again, this just like Hayward Howard, they're going to want to see how this guy moves in coverage at camp. But he is definitely, now that Hayward is technically off the board, LSU is going to try to find another DB, and my favorite thing about this particular staff is they're going to exhaust every option of this state. And that includes literally going to the northernmost tip, and that is Haynesville, which we talked off air about going down to Faraday and Gina. Man, if you go all the way to Haynesville, you must be looking for something. So they're not accidentally going up there. He's someone who, again, seeing in person, seeing these track times, I'm incredibly intrigued by. He's someone who's going into their senior season, could definitely be one of those, late bloomers who just kind of takes the state by storm, and would not be surprised if you and me are recording this podcast with the Bad Bunny sign in the Superdome in December saying Isaiah Washington was one of the best players in the Superdome again this week.
Yeah, he was super intriguing as a sophomore quarterback. He was even skinnier back then, but running around, and most of that game kind of running for his life a little bit from that Oak Grove defense. And then he's continued to mature, both in terms of his game itself and physically continuing to get bigger and stronger. And he did some things on offense this year, but had the big play on defense. And then some of those track numbers this week that I mentioned, the nearly 46-foot triple jump, 45, 9 3/4 inches in the triple jump was the 8th best mark of the weekend. And again, a track weekend that was loaded with high level, not just football athletes, but legitimate college track athletes. He had one of the best marks in that category. He was 9th in the 110-meter hurdles with 14.77 seconds. I always love seeing some of those hurdle times in particular. It shows not only the speed, but some of that athleticism, flexibility to get over those hurdles and keep on trucking. And then he ended up 12th in the 300-meter hurdles, despite that being, I think, his 4th event of the day. And you could tell he was kind of running out of gas a little bit in some of those quick turnarounds between the events. And so he was leading a lot of that race and just kind of got caught up at the end a little bit. He's someone that, when I was deleting space in StreamYard here to make sure we had some space to do this, I saw we had an episode at one point titled the Kenny Darby tribute episode, which I don't remember what exactly the extent of that was, but consider this one the Isaiah Washington tribute episode, because he was somebody that going into this month I looked at as maybe one of my biggest campaigns or crusades for this guy needs some more. He's a dude. And so if you're going to Gainesville, you must be looking for something. And I think LSU, pretty talented young athlete.
I would like to revisit the Kenny Darby tribute episode, and I'd like a copy sent to Mr. Darby the next time he says, "When am I coming to a spring practice out there in Bossier City?" 100%. Again, this is the beauty of the in-state scouting. This is the beauty of being a multi-sport athlete. Is Isaiah Washington again is someone that we've highlighted as someone that has shown flashes in on the football fields and underclassmen multiple occasions, coming off a spectacular state championships in Baton Rouge on the track. Now completely on the radar. It just this is the beauty of the spring is going through and getting closer evals on some of these top guys in the state. I'm extremely intrigued to see what comes. I love that Houston has already offered. I fully endorse them as a program that recruits Louisiana as well as anyone, with some excellent evals thrown in over the past couple of years when you factor in their time at Tulane. Wouldn't be surprised if Isaiah did find a home at a Power 4 conference, potentially even the SEC, now that Houston and like you said, La Tech have kind of sparked things for him.
And wanted to shout out to, you mentioned Tulane there. Some recent commitments for the Green Wave that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet. And so shout out to, I know our guy JJ McCleskey's having a nice little run there for the Green Wave. But Orion Saunders, a big athlete from up in Massachusetts, committed just a couple days ago or 2 days ago. Yeah. Langston Hogg, a guy we hadn't had a chance to talk about on air, but we had talked about previously off air, a talented offensive lineman from Georgia. And then also this weekend, along with Orion, Joshua Sims, a Northwestern commit, flips to Tulane, a guy from up there in Nashville, Tennessee. And so JJ dipping back into his home state up there where, he grew up and then played for the Volunteers during his playing career. The Tulane recruiting probably doesn't get as much love as it should, and certainly not as much love as it would like, but they're doing some good things. And I think important to kind of shout them out a little bit with some of those additions of late.
Coach Summerall and those Green Wave never stop recruiting. And you can just lock that up, take that to the bank.
Yeah, you mentioned all those LSU coaches I'll see tomorrow night at Destrehan and Carr. I'm sure I'll see JJ and Brock Hayes and a bunch of guys from that Tulane staff and in those beautiful colors that they bring up, anywhere they go. Best color combo in college football, probably. But again, appreciate you, man. It's a hectic week for both of us. You're heading out to Atlanta. I'm heading up to Ferriday and Winsboro. So same, doing some things on the road this week. And then I'll be over at that Destrehan Carr spring game on Wednesday and just kind of keep on rolling. And we'll have a lot of spring travel recap stuff to talk about next week when we're able to reconvene. Safe travels, man. Appreciate you as always.
My heart is in Wildcat Stadium. Just please check on it for me.
There you go. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jet Roser. This is Louisiana vs. Oils. Recruit that boot. Until next time, y'all be well. Hope you enjoyed the Isaiah Washington tribute app.